Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and today we will be discussing two books. We'll be discussing The Nest by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeny, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I did not. And Falling by Jane Green, two authors that I had never read before, and it turns out that The Nest is a debut novel by its author, so of course I hadn't read that author before, but I'd never read Jane Green either. And both of these books kept popping up on lists of must-read lists, summer reading lists, just looking forward lists. All of these lists I kept seeing on Twitter and social media and different articles, and so I thought, yes, I'm going to try a couple of new authors. These look intriguing. They're getting really good reviews. I am always looking for new books and new authors, so I thought I would give them a shot. And actually, before we start, I'm curious. I know that you can't answer me because this is a podcast, but I always like to ask questions anyway. And my question for you today is, how do you choose your books? How do you figure out what you're going to read next? Do you just go and wander around bookstores? Do you look for recommendations from friends or family? Do you have a certain search that you put into the internet and look for books that you want to read? For me, I think it's a combination of all of those things. So I come from a family of readers. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that before, and they're always giving me recommendations for things to read next, and I love that. I have many friends who are readers as well. Sometimes I go on social media like Facebook or something and just put out a plea. What are you reading? Is it good? Did you enjoy it? Give me your favorite authors, etc. And since I've gotten a Kindle, my husband got me a Kindle for Christmas several years ago, and since I've gotten a Kindle, I'm not as good at finding books. I'm much better if I go to the library or I go to the bookstore and just wander around. I'm not really good at finding books, just going to Amazon or somewhere and trying to browse there. So what I've started doing is whenever I'm in a bookstore, I always have my phone with me. So whenever I find a book that looks good, even if I don't buy it that day, I take pictures of them on my phone. So I've got all these pictures on my phone of books that I want to read, whether buy or check out the library or find some other way. And I love to do this when I'm in bookstores. I do it in airports a lot when I'm wandering around waiting for flights. So I have all these pictures on my phone that I just then go and check out and look to see if there's something that I want to read when I'm looking for something new. So that's a total aside, but today, like I said, we're going to be discussing these two books, The Nest by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeny and Falling by Jane Green. When we come back, I'll be discussing The Nest, but I am going to take a quick break, so stay tuned and I will be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and as I mentioned before the break, the first book that I will be looking at today is a book called The Nest by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeny. And as I said before, this was really recommended by a lot of people on different lists that I was looking at, and it just kept popping up everywhere I went, so I really wanted to give it a shot. And as I also said, this is the debut novel. This is the description of it, so you have an idea what it's about. A warm, funny, and acutely perceptive debut novel about 4 adult siblings and the fate of the shared inheritance that has shaped their choices and their lives. Every family has its problems, but even among the most troubled, the Plum family stands out as spectacularly dysfunctional. Years of simmering tensions finally reach a breaking point on an unseasonably cold afternoon in New York City as Melody, Beatrice, and Jack Plum gather to confront their charismatic and reckless older brother Leo, freshly released from rehab. Months earlier, an inebriated Leo got behind the wheel of a car with a 19-year-old waitress as his passenger. The ensuing accident has endangered the Plums' joint trust fund, the Nest, which they are months away from finally receiving. Meant by their deceased father to be a modest midlife supplement, the Plum siblings have watched the Nest value soar along with the stock market and have been counting on the money to solve a number of self-inflicted problems. Melody, a wife and mother in an upscale suburb, has an unwieldy mortgage and looming college tuition for her twin teenage daughters. Jack, an antiques dealer, has secretly borrowed against the beach cottage he shares with his husband, Walker, to keep his store open. And B, a once promising short story writer, just can't seem to finish her overdue novel. Can Leo rescue his siblings and by extension the people they love? Or will everyone need to reimagine the futures they've envisioned? Brought together as never before, Leo, Melody, Jack, and Beatrice must grapple with old resentments, present-day truths, and the significant emotional and financial toll of the accident, as well as finally acknowledge the choices they have made in their own lives. This is a story about the power of family, the possibilities of friendship, the way we depend on one another, and the ways we let one another down. In this tender, entertaining, and deftly written debut, Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeny brings a remarkable cast of characters to life to illuminate what money does to relationships, what happens to our ambitions over the course of time, and the fraught yet unbreakable ties we share with those we love. So that gives you a really good overview of what the book is about. And I think what drew this to me, besides the reviews that I had been reading, was this description of family. Not a perfect family. It says right up front that they are extremely dysfunctional, and they are. So I was intrigued enough by this book to pick it up, and I have to admit to you that it didn't suck me in. It took me a long time to get into this. It starts with this ginormous, and yes, I just made up that word. No, I didn't make it up, but it's not a real word. This really long, unwieldy first sentence. The first sentence is actually a paragraph. So right off, I was like, wow, this is not exactly what I was expecting, but I gave it a shot. And as I said, it was really hard for me to get into. I struggled with it, and I did eventually make it through and finish the entire book, but it certainly wasn't my favorite. And this is this author's debut novel, so I will pick up a book of hers again and give it a shot because, this was her first, and maybe she'll have something a little more to my liking later. But for me, the characters I couldn't resonate with the characters. Most of the characters in this book just were not good people. I think the most relatable is the youngest of the siblings, Melody. She's the wife and mother with the twin daughters, and she's been spending beyond her means because she's been relying on knowing that this trust will come on her 40th birthday. So she's been trying to keep up this house that she has. She's been trying to keep up appearances. And she, I think, is the most relatable, but none of them, I didn't want to root for any of them. Let me put it like that. When I read a book or when I watch a movie or a TV show, there has to be someone in there that I want to root for, someone that I really resonate with. And I didn't find that in this book. And I found that a little frustrating. That's why I struggled with it. And the book goes on, and I kept hoping that things would resolve themselves, things would work themselves out. It didn't necessarily have to be a happy ending, although I do appreciate a happy ending. I was just looking for some closure, maybe some lessons learned, maybe some growth in relationship. And there's definitely growth in relationships. There's definitely things that happen. There is closure to a certain extent, although not to my liking. There wasn't the amount of closure that I like. Now, on the one hand, I will say that it was very true to life. The characters aren't perfect. The characters have their flaws, they have their dysfunctions, they fight like siblings, they have their arguments with their spouses. And the end is, it's like life. We get a little bit of closure, but life goes on. And that's the way that this book does end. I won't give anything away, but I just didn't feel like I had much closure at the end. I wanted there to be more. Although I didn't want there to be more because I really wanted the book to be done because I was tired of this family. And I'm sorry that I'm so negative. I'm not trying to be negative because there were some good things about this book, and there's some really great reviews on this book. People loved it. People enjoyed the characters. They enjoyed the story. So don't take my word for it. I mean, never take just one person's word for it. Read other reviews. I always like to go when I've read a book or before I've read a book and read some of the really good reviews, the 5-star reviews, and then some of the 1-star reviews just to see what people are saying. Sometimes 1-star reviews are just someone who's cranky and didn't enjoy a book for some really random reason. Sometimes they're incredibly on point and they make a lot of sense. Same with the 5-star reviews. So always go and check out those reviews and see if this is something that you want to read. And I would say that with this book because, as I said, a lot of people really loved it. And a lot of people didn't. So it could be your cup of tea. It really could. If you enjoy stories that are very honest and true to life in the sense that the characters aren't perfect, the story isn't perfect, it's not, a fairy tale, happy, crazy, go lucky kind of book. It's not really a comedy. It's definitely on the more dramatic side of the spectrum. Then, this could definitely be the book for you. And there were a few characters that I did resonate with in certain ways, just not to the extent that I was sucked into this book, that I really loved this book and wanted more at the end. Sometimes, you finish a book and you go through this grieving period where you want more. You want more of those characters. And I didn't feel that from this book. So, not my favorite book. I will, again, as I said, try this author in the future if she writes something else, just to see if it's her writing style that I don't necessarily mesh with, or, maybe this was just a story that she wanted to tell that I didn't necessarily resonate with. Pick it up if it sounds interesting to you. So not my favorite. And I know I don't normally talk about books that aren't my favorite, but in the spirit of talking about books of all kinds that might appeal to a wide variety of audiences, that I'm trying to actually step out of my own comfort zone a little bit today, talking about a book that wasn't my favorite on the planet. I often say, I love this book. This book was amazing. And so I wanted to step out of my comfort zone, as I said. So I don't give this a huge rousing recommendation, but I do say it is a book that you should check out if it sounds intriguing to you. Don't take my word for it. Never take my word for it. Always check these things out. And if you like stories about family relations and dynamics and all of those things, stories that are a little more real than some novels can be, then definitely check out The Nest by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeny. I'm going to take my second break now, and when we come back, I'll be talking about Falling from the author Jane Graham. So stay tuned, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and as I said before the break, we will be talking about my second novel for this podcast, a book called Falling by Jane Green. And this, again, like The Nest, as I talked about in the first segment, was on a lot of lists. And I follow Jane Green on Twitter. The Book Review Podcast follows Jane Green on Twitter. And so I see her tweets, and I found her engaging and funny and poignant. And so when I saw that she had a new book coming out, I thought, yes, I'm looking for new authors. I would like to try this. So to give you an idea, first of all, of what the book is about, it's called, as I said, Falling, and it's a love story. It says right on the cover, Falling, a love story. And it says, when Emma Montague left the strict confines of upper-crust British life for New York, she felt sure it would make her happy. Away from her parents and expectations, she felt liberated, throwing herself into Manhattan life replete with a high-paying job, a gorgeous apartment, and a string of successful boyfriends. But the cutthroat world of finance and relentless pursuit of more began to take its toll. This wasn't the life she wanted either. On the move again, Emma settles in the picturesque waterfront town of Westport, Connecticut, a world apart from England and Manhattan. It is here that she begins to confront what she really wants from her life. With no job and knowing only one person in town, she channels her passion for creating beautiful spaces into remaking the dilapidated cottage she rents from Dominic, a local handyman who lives next door with his 6-year-old son. Unlike any man Emma has ever known, Dominic is confident, grounded, and committed to being present for his son, whose mother fled shortly after he was born. They become friends, and slowly much more, as Emma finds herself feeling at home in a way she never has before. But just as they start to imagine a life together as a family, fate intervenes in the most shocking of ways. For the first time, Emma has to stay and fight for what she loves, for the truth she has discovered about herself, or risk losing it all. In a novel of changing seasons, shifting lives, and selfless love, a story unfolds of one woman's far-reaching journey to discover who she is truly meant to be. So that's the description of the book, and as it said, it's the story of Emma and Dominic. Emma moves into this little rental in Westport, Connecticut, and her landlord is Dominic, and she doesn't actually really like him at first, but then they start a friendship that grows into a romance. I will say that this book did not end up going in the direction that I expected it to go. There is a bit of a twist on the ending that I won't be telling you, obviously, because you need to read it for yourself. Unlike the book that I talked about in the first segment, I did resonate more with these characters, which is something that I look for in a book. I need to be able to, as I said, resonate with characters, feel that I can relate to them in some way. And while I'm not British and I've never moved to a totally different country and done all of that, I did find ways that I could resonate with both Emma and Dominic. So that helped. I will say that I do want to try more of Jane Green's books, because this, again, wasn't one of my favorite books. I felt like things didn't get developed as well as they could have. I feel like Emma and Dominic's relationship just zooms forward from landlord, tenant, to friends, to dating, lovers, whatever you want to call it. It just felt a little rushed, maybe even a little forced to kind of move the plot along. I felt that the relationships otherwise, even out beyond Emma and Dominic, didn't get as developed as I would like. They both have complex families. They both have complex backstories. And we do get some of that. But I just never quite felt like I was getting the whole story. I felt like it was more, this is what happened, and so that's going to help this narrative move along. And obviously that's, what backstories do. They help narratives move along, but I felt like it was more of a device than a seamlessly woven plot. As I said, the ending wasn't what I was expecting, and I'm not always surprised by the way books end. Sometimes I can figure them out. So on the one hand, I really appreciate that this one had a twist that I wasn't fully expecting. But on the other hand, I'm not sure how I feel about how it ended. So in some ways, that's good, right? When you have a book that finishes and you are still thinking about it later, that's a good thing. But it left me feeling unsettled in ways that I didn't quite enjoy. So I did like this book. I didn't have as much trouble getting into it or reading it. It's a quick read. It goes fast. Those kind of zooming plot points, I think, move the story along really well. So I did enjoy it, and I do want to check out more of Jane Green's works. This one just wasn't maybe the best one for me to start with. I did read some reviews. As I said in the first segment, I like to read reviews and what other people have to say. And a couple of people said that this wasn't their favorite of her books, that they really liked some of her earlier books better. So if you are a Jane Green fan, I would love to hear your favorite books. I would love for you to connect with me on social media, and you can tell me what books of hers that you loved, and I would love to check those out. You can also tell me that I'm completely crazy and you loved this book, which is wonderful. No book is going to have two people read it and feel exactly the same way about it. That's what I love about reading. What I love about books is that you enter into these stories, you get to know characters, but other people are also entering into these stories, and we all read books differently because of where we are in our lives, where our lives have taken us. So we could read the same book at the same time period in life, and yet have completely different reactions because of what happened in our childhoods, or how we're seeing the world now, or even just the mood we're in that week that we pick up that book. So that's why I love books. I love reading. Even though neither of these books today that I've been talking about were my favorite, they're not going to go on my repeat reading list, and I do love to read books more than once when I love them. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't want you to pick them up. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to hear what your thoughts were on those books. I like to think of this podcast more of a book group, even though it's a group of one, just me in the studio. But I would love to hear what you think of certain books that I talk about. Did you love them? Did you hate them? Were you indifferent to them? Do you think I'm crazy from the opinion that I have on them? Or do you say, yeah, I kind of felt the same way? That's, what a book group often does. You talk about why you loved a book, why you didn't love a book. And so, as I said, today I tried to get out of my comfort zone a little bit and talk to you about two books that weren't necessarily my cup of tea, but that I wanted to bring to the podcast because they were on so many lists that I saw, and that's great. That's really great for those authors that they're showing up on so many lists, because then they're getting support, they're getting readers, they're getting people to check out their books, and that gives them a good foundation for everything going forward. Or in the case of Jane Green, I'm sorry, I have a friend whose name is Jane Graham, and I keep saying it wrong. Jane Green, who has other books, and that gets her name out there. It gets people to go and say, you know what? She's got all these great looking books. So it's great that they were on those lists. They brought themselves to my attention, and I was able to read them. I always feel like there's no book that is completely a waste of my time. Maybe there are, but I'd have to really think hard to find a book that just didn't bring anything to my life whatsoever. If you have those books, tell me too, so I can maybe try to avoid them. Anyway, that's enough out of me for this episode. I think that's probably all the time that we have. Thank you for joining me as we discussed The Nest by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeny and Falling by Jane Green. My friend Jane Graham is getting really good publicity today, isn't she? Jane Green, if you ever listen to this podcast, I completely apologize for butchering your name every time. It's such a simple and pretty name, Jane Green. So those were my two authors for the day. Thank you for bearing with me as I continually mispronounced Ms. Green's name. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you'll join me next time when we discuss more great books. But in the meantime, I hope you get out there and get yourself lost in a really good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.